"What's on your mind today?" she asked, an eyebrow raised. "I thought you had most of the bank's problems under control." I chuckled. "I do. But I'm in need of some personal advice this time." Coffee looked intrigued, and Gail smirked. "Now, this is interesting. Go on." "I'm looking to build some new relationships," I admitted, feeling uncharacteristically awkward. "Any tips on where to start?" Coffee's eyebrows rose, amused. "Are you serious? I hear you usually steer clear of social gatherings, so this is unexpected." "I've been avoiding things for too long, I guess," I replied. "It's time to get out there." Gail exchanged a look with Coffee, then smiled. "I'm glad you're moving on, Hugh. You'll be fine. Coffee knows a few places. She'll help you out." That evening at 8 p.m., I found myself walking into Pelican's, a popular bar downtown. Normally, I'd go to quieter beach spots or O'Brien's over on the west side, but Pelican's was lively, trendy, and full of energy. Coffee joined me, waving at some friends as we walked in, and led me to a small table tucked near the bar. We soon joined a lively group, and one of the younger guys greeted me with a smirk. "Hey, Coffee, who's your friend?" "Play nice, Greg," Coffee warned, her eyes narrowing slightly. Greg's red-headed friend nudged him with a grin. "No hard feelings," I replied, extending my hand. "I know I'm older than most here, but I can still keep up," Greg laughed, taking my hand, and we all settled in, letting the evening unfold. "Letting go was my mistake, Hugh. Sorry, but sometimes, I get a little envious," I said, glancing at him. "Any guy who walks in carrying coffee instantly catches my eye." Just then, a blonde woman with a playful grin walked up and linked her arm through mine. "Why do you always get all the good ones, Coffee?" she teased. "You're just playing greedy." I smirked and shrugged. "Jealous you can't have them all, Brittany? I think you've already managed to date most of them, anyway." Brittany stuck her tongue out at me and laughed. "Whatever. Aren't you married?" Coffee cut in before I could answer. "Nope. Hugh's single, he's just been keeping to himself lately. Thought I'd bring him out for a taste of Jacksonville's nightlife." Brittany's curiosity sparkled in her eyes as she leaned toward Hugh. "So, what do you do, Hugh? You look like a lawyer or a banker." "He's one of the top people at my bank," Coffee answered for him, a sly smile on her lips. Brittany's eyebrow raised. "Oh, really? What's your official title, Hugh? Or are you too important for titles?" Coffee laughed, nudging Brittany. "Trying to add him to your collection, Brittany?" she teased, clearly referencing someone from Brittany's past. "You're never going to let go of Rodney, are you?" Brittany shot back with a laugh, then turned back to Hugh with interest. "So, top guy, are you buying drinks and telling stories tonight?" Coffee gave me an approving look, then glanced at Brittany. "You two have fun. Is that alright with you, Hugh?" I turned to face Brittany, noticing her glossy lips and playful smile. "I don't know, Brittany. Are you a lot to handle?" She shot me a smirk. "Only if I like you." I turned back to Coffee. "Guess I'll take my chances." "Thanks, Coffee. Thank me on Monday, if you survive." She gave me a grin before she disappeared into the crowd. About an hour later, we were at her beachfront condo. I found myself standing by the window, watching the waves roll in. Brittany came over quietly, bringing 2 drinks. I glanced at my reflection in the glass and muttered, "I feel a little overdressed." She placed the drinks down and leaned against the table. "That's an easy fix," she replied, shooting me a knowing smile. Something about the moment made me think of Mary. This was different, though, and as I leaned back against the couch, I felt a surprising mix of excitement and uncertainty. "This is nice," Brittany said, rubbing her hands together as if settling in. "Always good to get an early start, so we can kick back and enjoy the time we have." She gestured to the kitchen. "I stocked up on everything we need for a weekend: drinks, Snacks, meals. No reason to leave before Monday morning. Her words had a lot of energy behind them, but I couldn't help wondering if I'd have the stamina to keep up. After all, I wasn't 27 anymore. At 57, I stayed in decent shape, but I still felt my age. I managed to leave her place on Monday morning, tired but alright. As I walked out, she gave me a warm goodbye, though I sensed she hadn't been overly impressed by our time together. I couldn't blame her. Back in my office, I sank into my chair, struggling to stay awake. Coffee poked her head in, a smirk on her face. "Rough weekend?" she asked with a mischievous grin. I laughed. "Not sure if I should thank you or blame you for this exhaustion, Coffee." She laughed along, shaking her head. "Brittany didn't expect you'd keep up with her, you know. She actually said it might be refreshing to date someone a little different." "Glad to be a trendsetter," I chuckled. Coffee walked over to my desk, casually crossing her legs as she leaned against it. "So, did you at least enjoy yourself?" I thought back on it, remembering the fun, though it hadn't been quite what I'd hoped for. We had some laughs and watched movies, but we ran out of things to talk about, to be honest. I smiled wryly. Those quiet moments felt a bit too quiet. I'd almost forgotten how easy it was to just enjoy silence with Mary. We could sit together without feeling the need to fill every pause. Coffee nodded, sympathy in her expression. "Brittany's smart, but outside of her work and personal life, she doesn't have a lot of other interests. Would you like me to introduce you to someone more, I don't know, seasoned? Just no retirees, okay?" She laughed, and I couldn't help but smile back at her warmth. For a brief moment, I was tempted. "That's a lovely offer, Coffee. Honestly, I think we'd make good friends, or more, if things were different. But I wouldn't want to complicate our work relationship. And Gail wouldn't be thrilled if things got messy." She sighed, nodding. "I get it, Hugh. But I still think you're going to be okay. Finding a good partner won't be the hard part, letting go of Mary will." The next weekend, I took her advice and went out with an attractive woman in her mid-40s. We had drinks, talked about politics and sports, and surprisingly, we liked a lot of the same movies and music. We didn't get too close that night, but the following weekend, we met again and had a genuinely good time. She was petite and charming, with a quick wit and an easygoing personality. I valued the time we spent together. Soon enough, I found myself seeing both her and Brittany on alternate weekends. One Saturday, after making another excuse to leave early, Brittany cornered me as I was getting ready to go. She looked directly at me, her expression a mix of frustration and hurt. "Do you really think I'm that naive, Hugh?" she asked sharply. "Naive?" I echoed, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" Brittany folded her arms. "Do you really think I don't see what's going on?" Her voice was low but pointed. "Would it surprise you to know I have a master's degree in economic theory, from the University of Chicago?" I paused, feeling a wave of surprise. I was back in Florida, buried in doctoral work, and still managing to keep up with world events just for fun, often tackling the New York Times crossword in ink. But somehow, Brittany saw right through my academic exterior, hinting that I didn't truly understand what mattered to her. "Hugh, just pack up and go," she snapped, looking frustrated. I felt a pang of guilt but tried to keep things light to avoid hurting her. "Emergencies happen all the time, Brittany," I said casually. "Banking doesn't shut down at 5. It's my job to be ready whenever I'm needed." Her response shocked me. She slapped me, her frustration boiling over. "Funny how these emergencies always seem to pop up when we're together, isn't it?" I wiped the corner of my mouth, the slap still stinging. Oddly, I felt more connected to her in that moment than I had during any of our good times. "I'm sorry, Brittany. I guess I'm not great at hiding the truth. You deserve someone who's there for more than just, well, the obvious." "Hugh, it's not just physical," she replied, softening a bit. "You may not realize it, but I really do enjoy our time together. A lot of guys my age just don't care about a connection beyond the surface." We sat in silence, and then I reached out. She leaned into my hand, as if saying goodbye without words. "Give them time, Brittany," I said. "Someday, you'll find someone who's grown up enough to be there for you fully. I'm just not that person." She smiled, a mix of disappointment and warmth. "Well, go on, Hugh. Think about me the next time you're with someone closer to your age. I'll be fine." As I left her place that night, I returned to my old friend, and we spent the following weekends together, creating quieter, simpler moments. One Saturday night, after dinner at Benny's, a favorite steakhouse near the Riverwalk, we strolled along the water, stopping to admire a plaque dedicated to two officers who had fallen during a challenging time for our city. It was a sober reminder of the resilience we shared in tough times. Later that evening, back at my place, the quiet felt different. We lay together in bed, the soft glow from the streetlight spilling in through the window, illuminating her peaceful form. I reached out, brushing her shoulder gently. Suddenly, a wave of sadness hit me, a deep sorrow that I hadn't quite expected. She noticed, wrapping her arms around me as I let out the grief I'd been holding back, mourning a love lost, a past that felt irretrievable. After a while, she sat up, turned on the light, and began to dress. I sat up too, the weight of the moment settling over me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I don't know where that came from." She gave me a gentle kiss on the cheek. "It's been wonderful, Hugh, really. You're a good man, but there's too much here, too many memories for me. Please don't call me again. I hope someday you'll find a way to move forward." As she left, I lay in the moonlight, wondering how much time had really passed since Mary left. 6 months? A lifetime? I had tried moving on, but it still felt as if her presence lingered in every corner of my mind. New faces, both younger and older, hadn't been able to erase her memory. Mary had managed to turn a page, but I was left still stuck in our final chapter. That Christmas in 2007, I split my time between visits to see Peter and Nicole, traveling between the expansive worlds of Los Angeles and New York. The stark contrast between those two cities felt almost therapeutic. New York, with its icy winds and bustling streets, had always seemed magical in December, especially after the snow fell. In LA, just days later, the sun shone down on us as we walked along Venice Beach, soaking in the energy of the boardwalk. At Nicole's condo, I held her daughter Calabria, marveling at how she resembled Nicole as a toddler. She was a beautiful, spirited little girl, a reminder of life moving forward, even if I felt stuck. Setting Calabria down, I watched her toddle over to her dad, Simon, who chuckled, "I think she needs a diaper change, don't you think, Nicole?" Nicole shook her head, laughing. "Nope, that's all yours. You get to enjoy all the special moments, diaper changes included." As Simon carried Calabria off, Nicole turned to me, her expression shifting. "Dad, you're losing weight. You look tired. Are you okay?" We talked often, but phone calls had limitations. It was hard to read the full story in someone's voice. "I'm all right, Nicole. You know me, I get by." She didn't let it go. "Dad, really? How are you? It doesn't feel like you've been able to move on from Mom." I sighed, pulling my hand away. "What is there to move on from? She's gone, and that's all there is to it. Moving on won't change that." She gave me a sad, knowing look. "Dad, I want you to be around when Calabria's old enough to drive us crazy with her wild friends. I need you to take care of yourself." Then she hesitated, glancing away as if she was debating something. "I probably shouldn't say this." "What is it?" She looked torn, her voice lowering. "Mom, she made me promise not to tell you, but there's something you should know." I felt a chill. "Nicole, is she okay? Is she sick?" "No, not physically," Nicole whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek. I should have told you sooner, but she made me promise to keep it quiet. It mattered so much to her that you not find out. I just sat there, watching her, stunned into silence. She left him, you know. A few months after she left you and moved to Chicago to be with him. It was barely a month after the divorce was finalized. His name was Richard Kelly. They ended things. Tears filled her eyes, and she brushed them away quickly. They just realized it was over, she said quietly. He went back to his wife, and she... Her voice faltered, and she stared down, unable to meet my gaze. I pressed her gently, just tell me. I'd rather know the truth, no matter how much it stings. Finally, she looked up. She never wanted to see you again. She wanted a fresh start, far away from everything, especially you. She thought you wouldn't check on her, that you'd never find out. She rubbed her temples, the strain evident on her face. She didn't want you to know because she was sure you'd try to get her back. She knew you cared, and she didn't want to hurt you again. I moved closer, resting a comforting hand on her shoulder. That's the truth, then. I managed. I'm just part of her past, something she didn't want to deal with anymore, I sighed, pulling her into a hug. Thank you for telling me. I know it wasn't easy. And I'm not angry, I know you were only trying to protect us both. She nodded, a little relieved, but still tearful. Dad, I acted with the best intentions. I thought it was better this way. I hugged her again, reassuring her. You did what you thought was right. Besides, even if you had told me sooner, it wouldn't have changed anything. She was never coming back. I paused, realizing what it felt like to face the truth. Any fantasy I had left, well, it's gone now. Thank you for your honesty. 2 weeks before Christmas, I planned for the kids to spend time together while I would be visiting Peter and Nicole. I arrived in Los Angeles on December 27th. Peter had managed to take a few days off, so we enjoyed dinner at a nice restaurant, then exchanged gifts beneath the still green Christmas tree in their cozy living room. Later that evening, after Austin was tucked in, we settled into a quiet evening. Peter's wife, Marina, a kind redhead who had once been a nurse, took Austin to bed, leaving us alone in the warmth of the softly lit room. Their home, nestled high in the hills, had a peaceful view of LA, where they felt safe from the hillside worries and winter storms. Nicole said she told you about Mom and him, Peter began, looking over at me. Yeah, she did. And that you both thought it was best not to tell me. I took a breath, trying to keep my tone light. But don't beat yourself up over it. Knowing wouldn't have changed much, and I don't blame either of you. I know you were just honoring her wishes. Peter sipped a non-alcoholic drink, his eyes distant. I'm not beating myself up, Dad. It's not guilt I feel, it's sadness. Sadness for you both. His voice softened, almost reverent. I met his gaze, puzzled. For both of us? Yes, he said, finally turning to face me fully. Dad, you might be moving on, seeing people in Jacksonville, but I can see that you haven't really let her go. I think that's why it hurts so much. You love her, and for someone like you, that makes moving on harder. I shrugged, accepting his words with a bittersweet smile. Maybe you're right. But I know that even if Mom's upset about how things went with him, she's a strong person. She'll find someone else, build a new life. She won't be alone for long. You're wrong, Dad, he said softly, his intensity catching me off guard. That's part of what makes all this so hard. Marina and I saw her a few times when she was with him, once here, and another time when Marina and Austin visited her in Chicago. She wasn't happy, Dad. Not really. I stayed quiet, letting him go on. Marina thought the same thing. She tried talking to Mom, asking if she was truly happy, if she still felt something for him, if it was worth leaving you for. But Mom just shook her head, not giving any real answers. Peter took a sip, then looked at me carefully. Dad, after the divorce, I called Mom on video chat. She looked sad, like she'd cry after every sentence. She said she and Richard had split, and then a week later, she was calling us from San Francisco. She had taken a new job transfer and has been there for over 4 months now. I took a long sip of brandy, an unexpected warmth spreading over me as I tried to process the news. Well, that tracks. She moved to Chicago to put some distance between us, and now she's moved even further west. I guess the only place left would be Hawaii. Peter chuckled but then shook his head. It's not about you, Dad. I think she's trying to get away from both of you. Curious, I glanced at him. Both of us? Yeah. When she thinks about you, she sees everything she left behind, the good, the bad, all of it. But when she thinks about him, she realizes how it was a mistake. She doesn't know what to do with any of it. I sat quietly, letting his words sink in. He looked out the window, the moonlight casting a soft glow on both of our reflections. Dad, you probably wondered why I took it so hard when I found out about Mom and that guy. I nodded, recalling those tense days. I did wonder. You're an adult, after all. I thought you'd be able to handle it, even if it wasn't easy. Peter looked at me, his gaze steady. I know it probably seemed over the top, but it shook me because, you and Mom have always been our foundation, for Nicole and me. Most of my friends have parents who split when they were younger, some more than once, and it came with a lot of drama. Parents fighting, making the kids pick sides, one spoiling them to buy affection, the other acting out of spite. He paused, as if trying to choose the right words. You and Mom never did that. You've been the constant, steady and reliable, showing us how to love, how to build a life. When you two started unraveling, it shook my faith in what I thought would always be there. I listened, my heart feeling heavy yet grateful for his honesty. It made sense now, seeing it from his perspective. And for a moment, all I could think was how fortunate I was to have raised such an insightful, compassionate son. Peter sat across from me, trying to put his feelings into words. You know, Dad, I see people around me all the time, friends, colleagues, either trying too hard to impress each other or constantly complaining about each other. But with you and Mom, it's always been different. You two were steady. You were there for us, and honestly, that's what I've always wanted for myself. He paused, his thoughts clearly elsewhere for a moment. When I got serious with Marina, I wondered, deep down, if she was like Mom. And I realized, she is, in a way. Maybe you don't see it, but I do. She's kind, and she's funny, and even when things get tough, I never have to worry. She's honest, too. We've always been open with each other, even when it's awkward. Peter leaned back, reaching for his glass of non-alcoholic beer, something he's stuck to for years. In his line of work, sobriety is a good choice. I watched him take a sip and then continue, his voice softened. Sometimes, Marina's even told me when she's noticed someone else. It hasn't happened often, but she's always been upfront. She knows I'd rather hear it than worry she's keeping things from me. And I know if she ever wanted to leave, she'd respect me enough to tell me. He sighed, the tension in his face easing for a moment. Then, Richard Kelly came along and shattered all of that. I tried asking Mom how it happened, what it was about him, but she couldn't really explain. So I went back to work, focusing on my patients and my responsibilities, trying not to let it get to me. But it's hard not to think about Marina. She's at home now with Austin, but she's also out there, grocery shopping, running errands, meeting other parents at doctor appointments. She even attends nursing seminars now and then to keep her license active. And every time I find myself wondering, who's she meeting? Who's she talking to? He looked away, staring at the window, his reflection mirroring a flicker of self-doubt. But Dad, I trust her. I really do. It's just that. I never would have guessed Mom would look at another man that way. And now, I find myself running little scenarios in my head. I imagine a day when Marina sits me down, maybe after Austin's in bed, and tells me she's met someone. I think I'd do it to see if I could survive it if she ever left. He fell silent, and I could see how deeply Mom's actions had unsettled him. Finally, I put a hand on his shoulder. "Peter, you know you can't keep thinking like this. You're too smart not to see where that leads. If you keep imagining she'll leave, keep feeding yourself that story, one day you might start believing it. And if you believe it too much, you might actually push her away without meaning to." He looked down, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "I don't know if I can stop," he whispered. "Listen, Peter," I said gently, trying to cut through his doubts. "There are millions of couples across the country, all facing different challenges. Some of them will go through rough patches, but plenty will stay strong. Life's about taking chances, and you have to believe that you and Marina can be one of the lucky ones." Peter nodded slowly, letting my words sink in. "But let's say, just for a moment, that things don't go as planned," I continued. "Let's say, years from now, Marina walks in and tells you she's leaving. Think about how you'd feel. Heartbroken, of course, but would you regret marrying her? Would you wish you hadn't had Austin or hadn't spent all that time with her?" He took a long breath, his face reflecting something between sadness and relief. "No," he said, finally. "I wouldn't." I gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Exactly. Life's full of uncertainties. If I had known years ago how things would end up with your mother and me, I wouldn't have changed a thing, not a single moment. Except, maybe, I would have been a little more present. But you know, hindsight is always clearer." After that conversation, I thought about reaching out to Mary. I knew she'd probably moved on, but the urge to communicate was there. I sent her an email to her old address, hoping she'd still check it. "Mary," I wrote, "Nicole and Peter know now. Don't blame them, they kept it quiet for months. I can't say if my thoughts mean anything to you anymore, but I'm sorry things didn't work out between you and Richard. I know you well enough to know he meant something. You're not someone who gives up a good life for something fleeting. Peter thinks you're not happy, and maybe he's right. If you ever want to talk about it, you can reach out. We may not be together, but we were friends once, and I still think of you that way. No strings attached. Hugh." I never got a response, but I hadn't really expected one. I just felt like I needed to reach out, even if the gesture went unnoticed. In the months that followed, I tried online dating. It seemed like a safer option than trying to meet someone through work or friends. On the dating site, I met women from different walks of life, some looking for real companionship, others just hoping to make friends after going through their own heartaches. I kept my expectations realistic. A few of the women I met turned into friends rather than anything romantic, but that was fine. We'd meet up for local theater shows or grab a drink without any pressure. Meanwhile, work stayed steady, though there were signs of change on the horizon. The housing market was starting to show cracks, and talk of an economic slowdown had people on edge. Gail, my colleague, and a few others had started preparing for tougher times ahead. In the banking world, optimism was still alive. Gail, with the tenacity of her grandfather, was determined to keep the Hunt family business thriving for another generation. She had absorbed his wisdom over the years, preparing herself to make hard calls and preserve the family's legacy. As for me, my responsibilities were equally challenging. I had to make tough decisions, pulling the plug on failing loans, facilitating the sale of businesses that had been poor investments from the start, and liquidating assets. My motto was cash over stocks whenever possible, and I spent countless hours restructuring weak banks, replacing ineffective staff, and acquiring new institutions. Mergers and closures were frequent, and they came with a human cost, telling longtime employees their roles were no longer needed and that they'd have to find new paths. The stress was palpable. One employee fainted as he packed his things, while two others made unfortunate choices that impacted their families. Banking wasn't the straightforward world some people imagined. It was a battle for survival, filled with difficult choices, all while maintaining a professional facade. Christmas of 2008 came and went, bringing a new president and a changing world. During a family gathering, Peter asked, Is there anyone special in your life these days, Dad? No, but I have a good circle of friends who keep me laughing, I said with a smile. Are you getting out, seeing people? He pressed. I chuckled. Enough, I suppose. Peter's wife, Marina, joined in, a playful smile on her face. There's someone, isn't there? I looked at my son, who was grinning back at me as he placed a tender kiss on Marina's head. I felt a rush of warmth seeing them together. Peter had moved past the hurt his mother had caused, and it filled me with a quiet sense of relief and pride. Nicole, my other daughter, approached the question differently. Dad, are you happy? Do you have anyone in your life? She asked, her tone gentle. I paused. Yes and no, I replied. I've got friends, and I get out a bit, but I'm busy at the bank, about 60 hours a week. It's not a bad life, really. Not as good as when I was with your mother, but I'm getting by. Nicole nodded thoughtfully. How is Mom doing? Not great, she admitted. She's lost weight and looks older. She never looked her age, but now, well, things have changed. She's had a hard few years, maybe even harder than you have. I took a breath, remembering that our breakup hadn't just impacted me. She, too, had been affected. Just remember, Nicole, I was the one dealing with the aftermath. And then we ended things for good. I heard she split with her new partner as well. Has she dated since then? She's been on a few dates, but nothing serious. I felt an unexpected wave of relief. As much as I didn't wish her ill, part of me wanted her to understand my pain. Nicole studied me, concern in her eyes. Would you ever reach out to her again, Dad? Just as a friend? Yes, I replied quietly, surprising myself with the ease of my answer. We were always friends as well as partners. There was no one else I could talk to as openly. Her advice meant the world to me. She always knew how to make me laugh, even on the worst days. If we hadn't been married, we'd still be friends now, I'm sure of it. Nicole's gaze softened. Maybe she needs a friend, Dad. Even if she won't admit it, she's struggling. She's not the same person anymore. She hesitated, then added, could you reach out to her? For me and Peter. I looked into Nicole's eyes, and I saw her mother's spirit in her. I knew I couldn't refuse her. I'll try. I promise. The next week, I sent an email, only to discover that she changed her address. Undeterred, I called the McDaniels office in San Francisco. Hello, may I speak with Miss Mary Meadows, please? Can I tell her who's calling? The receptionist asked politely. Hugh Davidson, I replied, holding my breath. After a few moments on hold, the receptionist returned with a sympathetic tone. I'm sorry, Miss Meadows isn't in the office. Would you like to leave a message on her voicemail? Yes, thank you. I waited for the beep, but after another pause, the receptionist returned. Her voicemail is full, actually. I'm very sorry. I tried calling at different times, 10 minutes after opening, before lunch, right after lunch, and near closing time. Each time, her voicemail was full or malfunctioning. Company policy prevented them from sharing her new email address. Finally, after 2 weeks of trying, I spoke with the same receptionist again. She sounded exasperated. Mr. Davidson, we're a business office. We have many clients needing our services, and your calls are creating an issue. I understand, but how do you know this isn't a business matter? I asked, feeling a hint of frustration. There was a long silence. I stared at my computer screen, feeling an unsettling mix of emotions. I'm really sorry, but you're putting me in a difficult spot, I replied, my voice strained. I knew I was cornering her, but it was hard to hold back. She was just following her boss's orders that were designed to keep me at a distance. Mary didn't want to hear from me, and it was clear she was intent on erasing me from her life completely. I remembered the words she'd said to someone else, no contact, no messages. It was as if she wanted to wipe me from existence. The thought gnawed at me. I could have flown to San Francisco and marched into McDaniel's headquarters, but I knew all too well the barriers she'd set up to prevent me from getting through. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. That anger didn't just bubble up, it festered, taking a full day to reach its boiling point. It wasn't just that she'd turned my life upside down, leaving me alone with my thoughts while she moved on. It was the sheer lack of respect she showed by refusing to acknowledge that I was still here, still fighting to make sense of what had happened. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of her life while she carried on without a care. So, the next day, fueled by frustration, I decided to take action. I composed an email addressed to the general contact at the McDaniel's office in San Francisco. At that moment, I didn't care who read it. Dear Miss Mary, I'm your ex-husband, the man who loved you for 36 years before you decided to move on. Just in case you've forgotten, I'm the one who never betrayed you. I'm sorry for trying to reach out, it's clear you want to avoid me, and having your receptionist tell me I can't contact you is the least respectful way to go about it. Why am I even surprised? I should have expected this behavior from you. I wanted to believe you were a decent person all those years, but now it's obvious that was a mistake. I was so caught up in my feelings that I didn't see things clearly. I doubt you understand this, as it seems you never really cared for me during our time together. I remember our early days. You were with someone else when we first met. I thought it was just strong feelings that pulled you to me, but our marriage began with a hint of dishonesty. I suspect you thought you could have a better life with me, knowing I came from money. You believed being with me would lead to comfort, and it did. For over 30 years, I gave you everything you wanted, including 2 children, whom I hope you truly care for. Now, I wonder if you were with others while pretending to be my loving wife. I was naive. I knew you enjoyed socializing, yet I believed you were being faithful. In retrospect, I think you might have been unfaithful for years. Your claims of resisting temptation don't seem genuine to me. I believe that first night with someone else broke the promises you made. You were dishonest and selfish. Looking back, I wish you had chosen your former fiancé instead of pretending to love me. I wish I could have found a partner who truly cared for me. I regret spending so many years devoted to what turned out to be a false hope. Now it feels too late. I'm almost 60, and there won't be another chance to start fresh with someone honest. When I left you that day, after you revealed the truth, I thanked you for our years together and wished you well. But you must know I wasn't entirely sincere. I felt relief knowing your recent partner finally moved on. I've listened to your side, but I believe my view is stronger. You're growing older, and it baffles me why you thought a man in his mid-40s would want to start a new chapter with you. You trusted his lies and left a loyal husband for brief moments of pleasure. You're still a lovely woman, and it seems you might keep seeking approval, even as life changes around you. I just hope your search for new experiences doesn't lead you to dangerous places. When you're gone, know that I will visit your grave, not to forgive you while you're alive, but to think about the past and the impact you had on my life. You'll never truly know how deeply I feel about you, and that's a regret I carry every day. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. A wave of emotions rushed over me, but mostly, I felt a sense of relief and freedom. I had once been kind and forgiving to someone who had caused me immense pain, but now, my true feelings had spilled out onto the screen. I hoped she could be moved by my words, that she would understand the depth of my emotions. I contemplated confronting Richard Kelly. I felt confident I could handle it, even with his connections and family backing him. I had spent years learning how to navigate influence, and with my skills and resources, I could create chaos in his life. The thought lingered for a few hours. Gail would support me, and we could do it quietly. But eventually, I pushed those thoughts aside. I didn't want to become the kind of person who would stoop to that level for personal revenge. My past actions had been based on necessity, not emotion. There was a limit I wasn't ready to cross, not now, and hopefully, never. Yet, As the minutes turned into hours, I began to regret the words I had sent to Mary. Despite my inner turmoil, I felt better than I had in over a year. That email captured everything I had felt since the day she told me about Richard Kelly. It was like a weight had been lifted after a long illness. But then anxiety crept in as I thought about how Peter and Nicole might react. I worried that my words could hurt them as much as they hurt their mother. But it was too late now, the message had been sent. I doubted this was the kind of support Nicole had hoped I would offer her mother, but sometimes, even the best intentions can lead to surprising results. The fault lay with her. I never received a reply to that email, and neither Peter nor Nicole mentioned it afterward. They weren't the type to pretend otherwise, so it was clear Mary probably didn't share it with them. Still, I imagined she knew about it. It felt like I had tossed a small stone into a deep well, watching it disappear without a sound. Just like that, my message had vanished, and I was left alone to grapple with the silence. I had never felt so thrown aside, but it hit me again like a ton of bricks. I no longer mattered to Mary. Life rolled on, but the world was in turmoil. The challenges in the housing market and the banking sector sent shockwaves across the country. Many financial institutions faltered, with CEOs stepping down or facing scrutiny over their roles in the crisis. Fortunately, our bank, Hunt Bank, stood strong. Our financial records were solid, our loans were secure, and our customers were protected. It was a point of pride for us, and even amidst the chaos, we found ourselves in the spotlight. Gail Hunt, along with her board of directors, made a bold decision to reject any government assistance or oversight, which drew attention from all corners. One afternoon, I found myself in a high-stakes meeting with Gail, Percy, Bobby, and a couple of high-ranking officials from a major federal agency. Initially, the atmosphere was calm, but it quickly shifted when the officials began throwing around veiled threats. "Hunt Bank is powerful, but you're not the government," one of them warned. "It might be in everyone's best interest if you reconsider your stance and accept our funding." Gail's expression was steely as she shot back, "That won't happen." The official raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by her resolve. "You're a formidable person, Gail. I wouldn't want this to escalate. But just remember, when private businesses clash with the government, it often leads to tough decisions. Will you accept our requests, or risk legal troubles that could jeopardize this bank your grandfather built?" Gail held his gaze for a moment before standing up. "I have an office in the other room. Please, come with me. I'd like to show you something." They left together, and 10 minutes later, they returned, the official now silent and signaling for his colleagues to exit quietly. Whatever Gail had shown him must have left an impression because we never heard from them again. After that encounter, we still had visitors, but they were more polite, less influential. I never learned what Gail had revealed to the federal representative, but I recalled stories from the past when my grandfather, Old Man Hunt, had dealt with similar threats from the mafia and South American criminals trying to infiltrate the banking business. With a few well-placed phone calls, he ensured they quickly vanished from our radar. He was a clever man, always collecting secrets for future use. I had never dared to ask about those secrets. It felt safer to pretend I didn't know anything. As summer 2009 approached, I received a call from Nicole. "Dad, I have some exciting news. Brandy Summers is getting married in New York City," she announced. Brandy was not just Nicole's best friend, she was practically family. With her vibrant red hair and bubbly personality, she had been a fixture in our lives, especially since her own family had gone through a rough patch. Brandy had come to live with us when she was just 15, after her mother received devastating health news and her father moved to Brazil, starting a new life with someone else. Brandy needed stability, and for 3 years, she found that in our home. Now, she had met a great guy from Boston, a college professor, and she was truly happy. She wants a June wedding at the dean's house, and she's asked you to walk her down the aisle. She considers you her father. I needed a moment to process this. I'm honored, But what about her real father? Nicole hesitated before explaining. She hasn't heard from him in 5 years. The last time he contacted her, he said he didn't have time to stay in touch anymore. It's like he vanished. You're the closest thing she has to a father now. Of course I'd be happy to do it. Just let me know the time, and I'll bring a nice wedding gift. 3 days later, Nicole called again, and I could sense the weight of her words before she even spoke. Dad, I'm not sure how to tell you this, but Brandy wants both of you at the wedding. You know how close she was to Mom. I nodded, understanding. Mary had been like a real mother to Brandy. She had provided the support and love that Brandy needed while growing up. Go on, I prompted. Dad, Brandy doesn't want Mom there. It's complicated, but she won't come if I'm there. The revelation hit me hard. It was Brandy's special day, and she deserved to feel loved and supported without the past looming over her. Tell Brandy I'll be there in spirit. I'll visit her and her new husband later this year. Just make sure to get good pictures for me. Okay, Dad, Nicole replied, her voice quivering. I could hear her tears over the phone, and it broke my heart. That warm Sunday in July was beautiful, and the Dean's house stood as a cozy farmhouse nestled in the heart of what was once an apple orchard. Guests parked all around, and the backyard had been transformed into an enchanting outdoor chapel. I arrived by taxi, slipping in quietly as most people gathered for the ceremony. Standing by the back window, I watched Brandy and her fiancé exchange vows under an apple tree, heavy with ripe red fruit. It was a scene straight out of a storybook, filled with love and warmth. After the ceremony, a greeting line formed, and I joined at the end, holding her wedding gift wrapped in green and blue paper. As I approached, I saw family and close friends flanking the happy couple. Brandy looked radiant, her eyes sparkling with joy. When she spotted me, she beamed, and in that moment, I knew that despite everything, I would always be a part of her life, if not as a father, then as a cherished friend and confidant. Hugh. Brandy called out, her voice bubbling with excitement as she spotted me from across the crowded room. She sprinted toward me, and for a moment, everything else faded away. I noticed a tall woman in a light, breezy outfit glancing in my direction. Maybe Nicole and Peter were right about her. She had faced her share of struggles in recent years, and though I could see signs of aging, it was hard to pinpoint exactly how much had changed. When Brandy reached me, I enveloped her in a warm hug, the kind that felt like it could mend the time lost between us. We exchanged a few quick words, nothing too deep, just the surface-level stuff. Then, I looked up again, and the tall woman had disappeared into the crowd. After chatting briefly with Brandy's young professor, I spent some time catching up with Nicole and Simon. The atmosphere was lively, filled with laughter and the sound of people enjoying their celebrations. I had only come for a quick visit, just to say hello, but it felt like my presence was a disruption in this joyful gathering. I glanced around, gauging the mood. You know, there are more wedding celebrations on the horizon. If I stick around, Mary might not come out to mingle. I wouldn't want to spoil this for you, I said, trying to keep it light. Brandy frowned slightly, clearly not satisfied with my excuse. Hugh, don't be ridiculous. You're part of this celebration. You've met my new husband, now just enjoy the moment. As I prepared to leave, I remembered the small gift I had brought with me. I handed it to Brandy, asking her to set it aside for later. She shook her head vehemently, her eyes sparkling with childlike excitement. No way. This is from you, I want to see it now. With that, she ripped off the wrapping paper with enthusiasm. Nicole, Simon, and Brandy's husband watched with smiles, sharing in her joy. As Brandy unveiled the framed photograph, the afternoon light danced off the glass, revealing a cherished memory. It was a Christmas photo from years ago, Mary and I together, flanked by our nearly grown daughters, with Peter standing proudly between us. The moment hung in the air, filled with nostalgia and bittersweet emotion. As the tears began to well up in Brandy's eyes, Nicole followed suit, wrapping her arms around her sister in a tight embrace. Simon and Brandy's husband exchanged glances, slowly piecing together the significance of the photo. I pulled Brandy close one last time, whispering, "For all the good memories we shared." As I turned to leave, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief wash over me. On my flight back to Jacksonville, I closed my eyes, and the image of that brown-eyed, brown-haired woman lingered in my mind. She had been a painful memory for the past 2 years, but somehow, seeing her again made me feel lighter. I thought about how difficult it had been to come face to face with her past, yet witnessing her life now felt refreshing. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, doubts would creep in. I worried that I might never see her again, that everyone around me was trying to shield me from the pain of it all. I had considered hiring someone to take pictures of her life, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. She had stepped away, and I was just dipping my toe back in, reminding myself she was still there. Now I knew for certain, and maybe, just maybe, I still loved her. Even if we didn't share the same space anymore, we lived in the same world, and that was enough for me. Life moved on. August rolled in, bringing with it the familiar heat and humidity that wrapped around you like a thick blanket. Gail, as she often did, organized a getaway for some important people during this sticky season. In the past, she had whisked us away to glamorous locales, places like the south of France, Alaska, Hawaii, and Bora Bora. This year, she had booked a trip on the Bon Chance, a rare French-owned cruise ship that only docked every few years. Since she was friends with the owner, we were lucky enough to secure spots on a special 2-week tour of the Caribbean. She invited me along, but for some reason, I felt an unexpected disinterest. Instead, I chose to drive down to St. Augustine, where I rented a cozy condo right on the beach and spent the week alone. I didn't bother with the TV or news, I just walked the shore from sunrise to sunset, lost in thought, relishing the sensation of sand between my toes. As night fell, I ventured into local bars, striking up conversations over drinks with interesting characters. One night, I met a woman named Renee, who shared her story about a former DEA agent who had transformed his life for her during a rough patch. One day, while strolling about 3 miles from my condo, I felt hot, sweaty, and parched. I approached a beach cart to grab a snow cone but realized I'd forgotten my wallet. "Let me help you," a young man in shorts and a bright Hawaiian shirt offered. He handed the vendor $2. "It's fine. It's on me. Don't worry about it." "Thanks, man." I left my wallet behind, I admitted sheepishly. "Are you here on vacation?" he asked, casually leaning against the cart. "Family here?" He nodded, taking in my appearance. "No one comes out here on a Thursday afternoon unless they're on break." "Right, definitely not. I live in Jacksonville." "Kevin," he introduced himself with a smile. "You're Hugh Davidson, then?" "Small world." "Yep," I replied, surprised at the coincidence. A strange look crossed his face. "Family at the condo?" "No partner, just one boy. He's not my biological child, but he's mine in a way," I explained. Just then, a small boy with dark hair rushed over, eyeing me cautiously as he stood apart from Kevin. "Can I have a snow cone?" he asked. Kevin replied, "I met this girl, Caroline, over there, but she doesn't have any money. Can you get her one too?" He smiled down at the boy. "Just a snow cone, Rob. You won't ask me for a ride home later, will you?" Kevin chuckled. "Come on, she's 14. She's not going to want to hang out with a 13-year-old. Besides, she has a friend back in Charlotte." Rob looked at me warily, assessing me as a stranger. "It's possible," I chimed in, trying to ease his tension. But Kevin quickly dismissed it. "I wish it could work out, but..." He purchased 2 snow cones and handed one to Rob. "Have fun. Be back at the condo by 6 p.m., and keep your phone where I can reach you, understand? About the girl, she's nice but older, so be careful." The boy made a face but took off with a cheerful blonde, her smile wide and infectious, totally different from Rob's cautious demeanor. "You two look like a father-son duo," I remarked to Kevin, watching them run off. "He's not mine by blood," Kevin replied, "but I'm part of the guardian ad litem program, so I was assigned to him. I helped him out of a tough situation with his stepdad, and the court made me his guardian. He's a good kid, though he's still dealing with some issues." I nodded, feeling a sense of camaraderie. "Looks like the kid got lucky." "Yeah, we both did," Kevin said, a hint of pride in his voice. "I was pretty lost before I took on this role. It probably saved me." We strolled and chatted for about half an hour before we parted ways. "Meet me at Murph's near Crescent Beach for a drink tonight. Our condo is just a block away," he said. "Sounds good," I replied, feeling an unexpected connection. Maybe this trip was turning out to be more than just a break from routine after all. "I have a lot planned, but I can't be busy all the time," he said, shaking his head with a smile as he walked away. We were deep into our third draft when he paused and looked over at me, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Excuse me for asking, but I noticed you're wearing a wedding ring, and I don't see your wife around." I chuckled softly, brushing my fingers over the ring. "Not a mystery, really. I'm divorced, 2 years now. I just haven't taken it off. Not that it matters, I'm not looking to remarry anytime soon." He studied me for a moment, a knowing expression crossing his face. "Can't seem to let go, huh?" "Probably not," I admitted, a hint of self-deprecation creeping into my tone. "But I'm still young. Maybe I'll find my way eventually. If you figure it out, let me know," he said with a playful grin. I sighed, remembering the last chapter of my marriage. "Yeah, divorced. But she was gone long before I finalized it. It's complicated." "I have to hear your story," he said, genuinely interested. I took a deep breath. "It's not much of a story, just really sad, to be honest. We had a fight one night, and she walked out without saying where she was going. No one knew what happened to her. I didn't see her for 3 years. When I finally did, she was a completely different person. She had lost her memory, gotten into trouble, and someone helped her. Now she has a child and a man she loves and wants to marry. She doesn't even remember me anymore." His brow furrowed in concern as I continued. "I looked at her when an officer brought her back to me, along with the man who rescued her. The officer asked me to sign papers so she could move on with her life. I wanted to refuse and tell her new partner to step aside because she was my wife, but the officer explained that I'd be taking her away from the man who cared for her, the one who had saved her. Asking her to live with a stranger. What kind of love was that?" He was right. I had lost her the moment she walked out. My love didn't change anything, the woman I loved was gone. He finished his beer, a silence hanging between us. "I have my job, my responsibilities, and a 13-year-old to help guide. It's a busy life. As long as I don't think too much about what I lost, I'm okay." I raised my cold mug in a toast to him. "Here's to never looking back." He chuckled softly. "If you think it was all pain, there were good stories too. Like that night I was at a bar and met this guy sitting with one of the most gorgeous redheads I've ever seen. He bought me a drink, and when I noticed the long scars on either side of his mouth, he proudly called them his scars of love. His girlfriend or wife, hard to tell which, gently touched the scars and smiled at him. She said, 'I have to keep an eye on this troublemaker, Mr. Davidson. Those scars attract attention.' He just grinned and said, 'They're a reminder of how we met.' I could see he enjoyed meeting new people, and I felt a wave of jealousy as I thought of the many years they had ahead of them while I was left reminiscing about my past. Exactly 1 week after I moved into my condo in St. Augustine, I found myself back at the office, expecting Gail and her team to still be out. Everyone was gone except for Gail. I asked her secretary about something trivial, and she casually mentioned that Gail was in her office. It was early, Only 8:30 a.m. But Gail had always been an early riser, a habit her grandfather instilled in her. I could have walked in, but something felt off. So, I knocked on the door. "Gail?" "Go away," she replied, her voice muffled. I hesitated, then gently opened the door without waiting for an invitation. When she looked up from her shiny black desk, I could see the strain etched across her face. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "I'm not really good company right now, Hugh," she said, avoiding my gaze. I took a seat across from her. "I thought you'd be gone for another week." She rubbed her lower lip, a habit she'd had since childhood, her eyes reflecting a mix of frustration and sadness. "I faced a situation that didn't go well. Why didn't you just handle it?" I prodded gently, sensing the weight she carried. "It wouldn't go away." "The situation, our past," she said, her voice dropping. I knew that Percy and his new boyfriend, along with Bobby and Chauvin, had been on the cruise too. If there had been any trouble, they would have stepped in. "What happened?" I asked, trying to understand. Her face scrunched up as if she had just tasted something bitter. Robert. Robert of all people. Of all the ships on the sea, he had to turn up on the Bon Chance. "What are the odds?" I replied, trying to lighten the mood. "You knew you'd run into him eventually." "Not on the Bon Chance," she exclaimed, her frustration boiling over. "He shouldn't even be able to afford a cabin on a teacher's salary, let alone on a fancy cruise like this." "Maybe he saved up for it," I suggested, trying to rationalize. "Please, Hugh. I booked the most expensive rooms on the ship, $2,000 a night. And he was staying above me in the owner's suite that costs $5,000 a night. On a teacher's income." She closed her eyes, clearly exasperated. "He got rich, Hugh. Some video game idea or something. And he was upstairs with someone who seemed very out of place, a friend of someone from Hollywood who helped him get the room." I could see him smiling at her while she was being all attentive to him. I tapped my fingers on the desk to get her attention. "Gail, you have more money than you know what to do with. People admire you everywhere, and you've been divorced for 5 years. Why does this bother you so much?" "He belongs to the past," she said, shaking her head. She turned in her chair to look at the portrait of her grandfather that stood out in the room, silence enveloping us for a moment. "I know you think I was unfair to him, Hugh. I know you and everyone else believed that too. But would it surprise you to know he had someone else?" I was taken aback but didn't show it. Robert Sandler had always seemed like a caring husband. I couldn't picture him being unfaithful to someone he loved as much as Gail. "I don't expect you to believe it," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But Cameron and I weren't involved, even though he was certainly interested. It was just that Robert was spending too much time at school. He should have been done by 3:35 p.m. with his grades and other tasks. He should have been home by 4 or 4:30 p.m. but he kept drifting further away. Then Cameron started wondering why Robert wasn't getting home until 6:30 or 7 p.m. most nights." As she spoke, I could see the pain etched on her face. Many nights passed, and I knew Cameron wanted to get closer to me, but I kept thinking about it. So, I asked Robert what was going on, and he said he was busy with schoolwork. "Sometimes people drift apart," I said softly, hoping to offer her some comfort. "It happens, even to the best of us. I just wish it hadn't ended this way," she murmured, her gaze still locked on her grandfather's portrait. In that moment, I knew that the ghosts of the past were still haunting her, and I hoped she could find a way to let them go. Sometimes, during our lunch breaks, I would catch up with other teachers, sharing stories and gossip about school life. It was during one of those conversations that Cameron mentioned something that struck a nerve: Robert might not be faithful. I took it lightly at first, but it gnawed at me. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt, so I confronted Robert several times. After much hesitation, he finally confessed that he had been spending time with another teacher, Sarah Keyes. At first, he insisted there was nothing inappropriate happening between them. They were just friends who talked a lot, often spending afternoons together in his classroom or hers, or grabbing coffee. But as I pressed him, it became clear that Sarah had developed feelings for him. She was honest enough to tell me that she found it easier to talk to Robert than to me, that they had more in common. Her honesty stung, and when I looked into her eyes, I saw tears. "It's not my fault," I wanted to say. Sure, I might have made mistakes, but Robert is the one entangled with her. I could sense her frustration and disappointment in men, and it was hard to swallow. Robert might deny his feelings all he wanted, but I had seen the signs from the moment he first mentioned her. He was facing the fallout from me, from Cameron, and from Cameron's friends. He had to reckon with the trouble he'd created for himself. This was a side of the story I had never heard before, even after Mary had left me. When she and I talked about my struggles, it had changed my perspective, but whatever had happened with Robert and Sarah felt like old news. "Do you want me to handle this?" I asked her, sensing the tension in the air. She looked at me for a moment, then smiled through her tears. "Would you? Just say the word." After a brief pause, she shook her head. "We are quite the pair, aren't we, Hugh? Everyone else seems to move forward. Why can't we?" If it had been a quiz, I would have failed because I didn't have an answer. It was a day I would never forget. On Thursday, September 17th, at precisely 2:30 p.m., the phone rang. I was in my office when my secretary, her voice trembling, said, "Hugh, you need to take this call." I immediately sensed that something was wrong. When I picked up, a man's voice came through the line. It took me a moment to realize who it was. "Simon? What's going on?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Hugh, it's Nicole. She's hurt badly." "What? What do you mean?" My heart raced. "We're at New York Presbyterian. She's been in a car accident." "Is she okay? How bad is it?" I could hardly make sense of the words. "It's very serious. She has broken bones and significant damage to one side of her face. We believe there's some brain injury, but we don't know how serious it is. You need to get here as soon as possible." Those words felt like a punch to the gut. "I'll be there," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. "Whatever she needs, money won't be an issue. Just let me talk to Simon again." "Dad, please stay calm," Simon urged. "I'm on my way. Just tell them money is no problem. I need to get to her." I dashed to Gail's office, barely able to process what was happening. Percy and Bobby stopped me in the hall, concern etched on their faces. "How is it, Hugh?" Percy asked. "It's serious," I replied. "I need to get there fast." Bobby stepped aside. "I'll let Gail know. I'll have her plane ready by the time you arrive." Percy stayed with me as Gail walked out of her office, her face registering shock. "What happened?" she asked. "Nicole was in an accident. She's hurt badly." The words came out like a strangled gasp. "She may have a brain injury, and they told me to get there quickly." "Where is she?" Percy demanded. "New York Presbyterian," I managed to say. "Take my car. Don't stop for lights. If the police pull you over, keep going. I'll call the sheriff myself to clear the way." "Gail, Don't worry, Hugh. Get there. I'll see what I can do. Just get there." Before I could react, she hugged me tightly. "Make sure they know money is no object. Get her the best care, and don't let anything stand in your way. You have my support. The Hunt Bank stands with you." As we reached the airstrip, my phone buzzed with another call. It was Gail again. "Brett Wilinski is one of the best doctors in the field. He's from London but teaching at Harvard. I just spoke with him. He owes me a favor. He'll be at Presbyterian around the same time you arrive. If anyone can help Nicole, it's him." "Thank you," I whispered, trying to find the right words to express my gratitude. "Don't say it, Hugh. You stand by those who stand by you. You heard my grandfather say that. He lived by it, and I will too." I climbed into the passenger seat of the plane, which felt more like a lifeline than an aircraft. Just me, the pilot, and a flight attendant who offered me a drink. She suggested some salmon and cheese on crackers, but I had no appetite. I knew I needed energy for what lay ahead. As we took off, my mind was racing. Memories of Nicole flashed through my thoughts, the laughter we shared, the milestones she achieved. One particular memory struck me, an old TV show from the late 90s, Nash Bridges. The character, played by Don Johnson, had a daughter who suffered a tragic accident. I recalled a scene where the hospital mixed up their identities, leading to the heartbreaking moment when he learned his daughter had died. The way he cried out, "What will I do without her?" resonated deeply with me now, filling my heart with a familiar dread. Though I couldn't voice my fears, the worry gnawed at me. What would I do without Nicole? As we soared through the sky, the world below faded, but my anxiety only grew stronger. As I stepped into the hospital, a chill ran down my spine. The air was thick with an unsettling mix of antiseptic and anxiety. Gail had arranged for a security guard to meet me at the entrance, ready to escort me to the critical care unit where Nicole was fighting for her life. My heart raced as I scanned the room, searching for a glimpse of hope amid the chaos. I spotted Simon just as I got closer, his face a mixture of fear and relief. When I reached him, he hugged me tightly, trembling in my arms. "Hugh. Where's Austin?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Austin's with my mom for now," I reassured him, trying to keep my own panic at bay. "Hold on, Simon. My boss pulled in one of the best neurosurgeons in the world. He'll be here any minute. Nicole will be in good hands." "What happened?" Simon wiped his tears away, his face etched with worry. "She was walking back from lunch," he said, his voice quivering. "A cab driver. The authorities said he might have had a medical issue. He lost control and hit her just before she got to the curb. She was thrown a good distance away and got hurt really badly." Just hearing that made my stomach churn. It felt as if the ground had shifted beneath me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Mr. Davidson?" A voice interrupted my thoughts. It was Brett Wilinski, a tall man with striking features and an air of quiet confidence. He wore slacks and an open-neck shirt that only added to his impressive demeanor. A large silver Star of David pendant hung around his neck, catching the fluorescent lights as he moved. Gail had filled me in earlier, and I knew he was someone we could trust. "I've been talking with Dr. Sloan and some specialists," he said, his tone serious. "I don't have my team with me, but I'll do my best. Key people are on their way from London now." "Thank you, doctor," I said, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. He shrugged, his eyes earnest. "I owe your boss a lot. She helped me when I really needed a friend. I'll do everything I can for your daughter. I can't promise anything because it sounds like she's hurt badly, but if you pray, that might help." As we spoke, I noticed a figure approaching us from the other side of the waiting area. It was Mary. She was focused, striding confidently in our direction, but when she spotted me and Simon, she stopped suddenly, like a deer caught in headlights. My heart sank. How had she gotten here so quickly? Had she moved from San Francisco to New York? She wore jeans and a casually styled top, her hair tousled but somehow still striking. There was no makeup on her face, yet she radiated an unearthly beauty that took my breath away. "Mary," Simon called, relief washing over his features, but it quickly shifted to confusion as she turned and began to walk away. "Mary," Simon exclaimed, desperation lacing his voice. Without thinking, I hurried through the doors leading to the critical care waiting area. As I reached the hallway, I saw her moving swiftly to the left down a long corridor. A few nurses glanced my way as I began to run, but I paid them no mind. At the end of the corridor, I hesitated, looking left and right. To the left was another long hallway, gleaming under the harsh hospital lights. To the right, I spotted the restrooms, and just as I turned to go that way, I saw the women's door closing. I rushed toward it, pushing the door open. Inside, a nurse in scrubs was washing her hands in front of the mirror. She looked at me with a raised eyebrow, ready to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. "Please," I said, quickly pulling out a business card and scribbling a number on it. "Call this number. Don't mention what you saw. Just call and explain what's going on. You might get a nice surprise this Christmas. If you call security, things are going to get very complicated." Her expression shifted from confusion to concern. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she processed my words. "I'm not going to harm her," I added, lowering my voice. "But if I did, you'd be a witness, and you could find yourself in a tough spot. Think about it, this could be a huge decision for you." After a moment, she glanced back at the stall and walked out, leaving me alone with the door. I approached the stall, crouching to see the feet of whoever was inside. "Mary," I called gently. "You don't have to talk to me. You can pretend I'm not here, but we need to go back together." Silence hung heavy in the air, and I thought I heard her breathing. "I don't know what the issue is, Mary. If it's about the email I sent, I'm sorry. I was upset, but none of that matters right now. We need to go back." Still, there was no reply. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "Step away from the door. Back up as far as you can, Mary. I won't apologize if you get hurt. If you don't, I promise I won't harm you." I waited, counting the seconds in my head. When 30 seconds passed without a sound, I kicked the door open with a loud crash. The lock broke with a sharp snap, and the door slammed against the wall before swinging back. Inside, I found her sitting on the toilet, looking down, trying to make herself smaller. Even now, she wouldn't meet my gaze. I didn't touch her. "I'm going back to the critical care waiting area, Mary. You're coming with me. You can choose not to talk or look at me. You can stay on the other side of the room, but you are going back with me now. If I need to, I'll help you. Don't doubt me, Mary." Why? That was the first word I heard from her in over 2 years. "Because our daughter might be very sick," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "She might not make it through the night. If she wakes up, even for a moment, she will want to see both of us together. If it's the last thing she sees, it has to be us. That's why." I didn't expect it, but she reached out her hand. I helped her to her feet, stepping back to give her space. She carefully avoided touching me as she walked past. As we stepped out of the stall, I noticed 2 hospital security guards coming toward us. One of the private security men hired by Gale quickly intercepted them, engaging in a hushed conversation. After a brief exchange, the 3 men looked at each other and then at us, their expressions unreadable. Then, without further ado, they turned and walked away, leaving us in an uncertain silence. I followed my ex-wife down the hallway, noticing the way she moved. There was a grace in her stride that I had always admired. When we reached the waiting area, Simon rushed into Mary's arms, seeking comfort in her embrace. "It's going to be okay," she murmured repeatedly, her voice soothing. "God wouldn't be that harsh, Simon. He isn't that harsh." We settled in the waiting area with another family, the tension palpable as we watched the news play silently on a nearby TV. Mary ordered a hamburger for Simon, and one of the security personnel brought it to him. He picked at it listlessly, taking only a few bites before pushing it aside, lost in thought. In that moment, we were all stuck in a limbo of fear and hope, waiting for news that could change everything. The weight of the world rested heavily on our shoulders, but the faintest glimmer of hope flickered in the depths of our despair. We were a fractured family, but at that moment, we were together, and that was all that mattered. Hugh leaned heavily on one of the couches in the waiting area, feeling a wave of nausea wash over him. The security personnel rushed to help, gently assisting him as Mary tried to get him to eat some crackers with a sip of water. He struggled to relax, his mind a storm of worry. Eventually, he decided he needed to step out for some air, and Mary walked with him, her presence offering a small measure of comfort. At 7:30 p.m., my phone rang. It was Peter. I just finished surgery and heard the news. I can be at the house in 30 minutes and take a friend's jet to be there in 2 hours. I know you want to come, but you don't have to. I took a deep breath, explaining the situation. Wilinski. I think I know that name. Gail mentioned he was really good, everyone says he is. But even if he wasn't, I wouldn't let you operate on your sister, Peter. How would you feel if something went wrong? That's too big of a risk for anyone. After a moment of silence, he replied, "Okay, I'll get someone to take my place. Marina and Austin will be there by tomorrow morning." Later that night, after Simon had paced back and forth in the waiting room several times, I felt my stomach rumble. The security personnel returned with a hot pastrami sandwich, a pickle, and a cold drink. It was oddly comforting, and I marveled at how they seemed to know exactly what I needed. The sandwich tasted better than anything I had enjoyed in a long time, reminding me of the times Nicole and I had shared a similar meal while I was teaching her about dining at a deli years ago. Funny how memories like that could creep back during moments like these. I felt tears prick my eyes, and when I looked up, I saw Mary watching me with a thoughtful expression. She must have suggested the meal, she hadn't forgotten much about our past. But while I had always understood her well, it felt like an invisible wall had grown between us. She wasn't the same person I remembered. At 2 a.m., a weary Wilinski entered the waiting room, skipping over me to reach Simon, who had nearly slumped over in his chair. Mary gently shook him awake. "She's still not out of the woods," Wilinski said, placing a reassuring hand on Simon's shoulder. "We won't know how serious the damage to her brain is until my team arrives. The good news is she's stable. She's a fighter, her heartbeat is strong, and I'm hopeful she'll pull through." An uncomfortable silence filled the air as Wilinski helped Simon to a couch. I shook Wilinski's hand, trying to convey my appreciation. "Don't thank me until she's back to being the girl you remember with her family. I think she has a chance, but she has gone through a lot. Like you said, Doctor, she's strong. She'll make it." Wilinski nodded. "Just like her father. Mr. Davidson, you might not realize how much Miss Hunt admires you. She sees you as more than just a valued employee." "Same here," I replied, feeling a mix of pride and unease. With that, Wilinski left, and Simon started to calm down. "Hugh, I'll stay here. Mary will stick around a bit longer. Why don't you head back to the apartment and get some rest? You can switch with Mary in a few hours." At 3 a.m., I found myself standing in Simon's pajamas, gazing out at the New York skyline from their balcony. My reflection stared back at me, lost in thought, when suddenly I noticed a figure behind me. I hadn't heard her enter, but she must have used her key. The night lights flickered, casting shadows on her features, and for a moment, she was just a silhouette, shifting in and out of the moonlight. "Ghosts and shadows seem to follow you," she said softly, shaking her head. "You're the ghost, Hugh. Why won't you stop haunting me?" "Usually, a ghost is someone who has passed on," I replied, my voice heavy with irony. "But I guess I've been distant from you for at least 2 years." She stood beside me, staring into the early morning darkness of New York. "Your face is the first thing I see each morning and the last thing at night, every single day for 2 years. No matter what, I can't get you out of my thoughts. I thought after I left Richard, maybe starting new relationships would help, but it's like you're part of a haunting story, you keep returning." "This isn't my fault," I said, but she cut me off. "I know. That's what makes it so hard. If only you had made a mistake first, I could still feel bad, but no, it's you, Hugh. You've been dependable for so long. I was the one who wandered away and broke everything I ever stood for. I didn't respond. Instead, I stood there, grappling with the weight of her words. You could at least argue with me, she said, her voice rising slightly. When you're right, you're right. Don't get too proud. Elaine was really sad when she came to my office, asking me to let you go. She cared about you. I looked away, remembering how it hadn't felt the same after I sent Elaine those kind messages. She had talked to me about how close we were, but I was already drifting. The day after I ended things, I called her to explain a business trip would take me away that weekend. When I returned, I started to pull away. I eventually told her over the phone that it was a mistake to keep going. You broke that girl's heart, she continued, her voice breaking slightly. Did you know she truly cared for you? No, I guess I didn't, I admitted, feeling the weight of her gaze. I watched her face light up in the moonlight, and it was surreal how quickly we had slipped into this conversation. It had been 2 years since we last spoke, and now we were navigating the treacherous waters of our past like two bitter exes. It felt strange and painful. I knew I was hurting her, but I just couldn't find the right words. Your face keeps coming to my mind, she continued, almost in a whisper. And I knew how you would feel about it. I was scared it would lead to something I couldn't manage. Do you remember that ad about potato chips? I knew if I took that first step, I wouldn't be able to stop wanting more and risk everything. I felt the weight of that honesty, even if it wasn't fair. So I gave up that part of my life for you, and look where it got me. I lost you anyway. She stepped closer, her voice trembling as she spoke. She came to me, asking if she should let you go. She thought that if I agreed to a divorce, you would follow your heart. She dreamed of children and a happy home. But when I told her you were probably just having a phase, that's when she broke down. I turned to face her fully, searching her eyes for some glimmer of understanding. She looked almost 60, but somehow managed to appear much younger. What was her secret? I didn't seek to understand it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both caught in a web of our own making. And in that moment, I realized how tangled our lives had become, like two ships adrift in a stormy sea, desperate to find our way back to each other but held captive by our own fears and mistakes. I know I made mistakes, I began, my voice heavy with regret. And I owe you an apology for every moment I strayed from what a partner should be. But I swear to you, I never crossed the final line. I felt the urge, yes, but I couldn't bring myself to do it because I loved you too much. I didn't want to lose what we had, and in the end, I was the one who ruined everything. We shared a moment of silence, the weight of my words hanging between us like a thick fog. Mary sighed, a sound that spoke of exhaustion and acceptance. I'm glad you found me here. It was exhausting trying to stay away from you. Why did you avoid me? I asked, genuinely perplexed. We're divorced now. Yes, it hurts, but it's part of life. You made your choices, and while it was painful, so many people go through this. Why disappear? The thought of seeing you again was too overwhelming, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I kept imagining your face when I told you I wanted to vanish. I never wanted to see that look in your eyes again. I felt so powerless, like there was nothing I could do to fix things. I couldn't ask for your forgiveness, and I couldn't forgive myself, either. I just wished I could pretend you weren't there. You did well, I said, trying to comfort her. Another pause ensued before she spoke again, her tone shifting. Do you think she'll be okay? I don't know, I replied, the uncertainty weighing heavily on me. Wilinski is very skilled, and like he said, she's strong. I have to believe she'll make it. She's your daughter, Hugh, Mary said softly, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. I believe she will. Together, we gazed out at the sprawling city lights, which twinkled like distant stars, offering a sense of hope in this bleak moment. Mary hugged herself tightly, a gesture that hinted at her vulnerability. You know what I dislike the most? She asked suddenly, her eyes fixed on the view. Besides being here while she's in that hospital bed. No, I can't read you these days, I said, feeling the tension shift. Other couples, no matter how much they've hurt each other, no matter how bitter their separation, can still support one another. But I know you can't stand me, and I couldn't bear to see the look on your face if I tried to reach out. When I didn't respond, she let her arms drop and took a step away from the window. At least we don't have to avoid each other anymore. We can be here for her, even if we never truly get over what happened between us. We can come together for her, and I can face you. With that, she walked toward the hallway leading to their bedroom. I already put my things in the guest room. I'll stay in their bedroom tonight. I'll see you in a few hours. Good night, Hugh. She paused before entering the hallway, glancing back at me. Good night. It feels so strange to say that after 2 years. I never thought I'd say it again. There was a hint of longing in her voice, but I brushed it off as wishful thinking. The next day, Wilinski and his team arrived, along with Peter and his family. When Peter and Marina walked in, having left Austin with Simon's mother, they were taken aback to find Mary and me in the waiting room together. I shook my head, signaling them to hold their questions. Around 3 p.m., I stepped outside for some fresh air and a quick snack. Peter followed me, his expression serious. You aren't going to tell me what's happening, are you? There's not much to say. Your mother and I talked. She's being open now, and that's it. Nothing else has changed, except we can be in the same room. It's a start. It truly is enough, he replied, sounding relieved. We didn't chat much, but I could feel a connection growing between us. Occasionally, I'd glance over at Mary, who would be leaning down, talking softly to Peter or Simon. In those moments, it was as if time folded in on itself, allowing me to forget the pain and remember the good times we shared. Mary would catch my eye, and in that familiar way she had, I could see her thoughts flickering behind her gaze. I sensed her feeling my stare, and she would look down, our careful dance of avoidance keeping the air between us charged but respectful. By the third day, Nicole's condition began to improve bit by bit. She opened her eyes, taking in the familiar faces around her in her private room, which was made quiet thanks to Gail's request. She looked at her mother and me standing side by side. We didn't hold hands, but the unspoken support was palpable. The left side of Nicole's face was bandaged from head to chin, her hair shaved in patches. Yet nothing could diminish the beauty of her tentative smile when she opened her eyes. Wilinski, flanked by a group of doctors, stood by her bedside, their expressions a mix of professionalism and compassion. The brain scans look good, Wilinski announced, his voice carrying reassurance. He spoke loudly enough for all of us to hear. We won't know everything until she can talk, but I don't think there will be any serious long-term issues. We managed to save her left leg and arm, but she will need several surgeries and likely months of rehabilitation. She may not run in a marathon again, but she hasn't been running much anyway. He offered a small smile, the kind that doctors sometimes use to ease the tension. She might have some scars on her face, but I believe we can keep the muscles in her cheek intact. In a year or two, it should be hard to notice any damage unless you know where to look. Simon and Peter looked clearly emotional, relief flooding their features. I hadn't realized how comforting Mary's presence could be until I felt her lean against me for just a moment. I hesitated, not wanting to pull away, but then I gently did. She wiped her eyes, looking up at me. Tell Gail I'm very grateful, more than I can ever repay her. Maybe someday. I stayed for another 2 days, careful not to touch again, my resolve firm despite the emotions swirling around us. After spending some time with Nicole, I explained what had happened and promised I would come back in a few weeks for a weekend visit. When I returned to Gail's office to share the news, even though we had been in regular contact by phone, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I'm glad to hear that, Hugh. I'm also happy you got to speak with Mary. How did it go? People talk, I shrugged. Is there any chance for reconciliation? No. There's no Cold War anymore. We're just two divorced people now. I can't forgive or forget. She let me down. She was living a false life with me, and I just can't see her the same way again. I still care about her, but I can never trust her fully. I wish her well, let her live her life in New York or on the West Coast. I'll keep mine here, and that's what I intend to do. And that's exactly what I did. Life went on, and as the year came to a close, Hunt Bank remained steady, a reliable constant amid the shifting tides of my personal life. We were facing challenges, no doubt about it. When the economy struggles, no one escapes unscathed. Our team had to make tough decisions, cutting staff and severing ties with other banks. Gail worked long hours, as did the rest of us, but it seemed to weigh on her more than it did on the rest of the team. In the finance world, we noticed the changes more acutely than others. We worked tirelessly to stay afloat, knowing that if conditions worsened across the country, we might not survive the storm. The economic downturn was relentless, and while we knew we would get through it, we also realized life was not going to be easy. As the year drew to a close, I noticed that Gail was struggling more than ever. Maybe it was because she had always lived a charmed life. After losing her parents, her grandfather had stepped in to care for her, giving her everything she could have wanted. He couldn't replace her parents, of course, but his love and support made her life seem almost perfect. When she met Robert in high school, he adored her too. Gail was exceptionally smart, incredibly wealthy, and seemed to have a knack for both love and business. Managing vast amounts of money and complex financial plans was effortless for her. For people like me, though, the pressure was real. I was the one making the hard decisions that affected our employees' lives, while Gail navigated her world of comfort and privilege. Her reality felt separate from the struggles that weighed heavily on the rest of us. It was as if the rich lived in a different universe, a point someone had once made that stuck with me. While she felt sad about her marriage ending, that was the only moment reality seemed to breach her well-constructed life. As time wore on, the stress of our situation began to take its toll on her. Many nights, I would find her still at her desk long after everyone else had left, staring blankly at her computer screen with a drink in hand. I would come in to wrap up my day, only to find her there alone, sometimes with her head resting on a mountain of paperwork. I'd wake her gently, help her to my car, and make sure her team looked after her. On those nights, she was too exhausted to argue. It was late November when I flew to New York to spend Thanksgiving with Simon and Nicole. Nicole was still recovering from her treatments but had made it out of the hospital and was navigating the house on crutches. This year, Peter and Marina were there too, and to my surprise, Mary was waiting for me when I arrived. It had been nearly 3 years since our family had all gathered together, and I thought it might be tough, but it turned out to be surprisingly easy. Mary and I had figured out how to be together now, but I was unsure how we would navigate the dynamics of the whole family. Could we all ignore the tension in the room? Would we be able to avoid discussing her choices, my divorce, and my past mistakes? I didn't think she had informed the kids about everything that had transpired during our time apart, and I hoped she hadn't. It would be hard for me to seem honorable if they knew about my past missteps, but I reminded myself that I hadn't crossed certain lines. Fortunately, Thanksgiving went off without a hitch, and by the following week, I was back in my work routine. When Friday night rolled around, we were wrapping up another challenging week at the office. I noticed Gail preparing to leave, and I had a hunch about where she was heading. A private club, most likely, where she tried to meet someone new. But I knew that would only leave her feeling lonelier the next day. Sometimes, a solid friendship means more than any fleeting excitement, no matter how hard that might seem. I had already made plans to meet Percy and Bobby at around 5 p.m. I peeked into Gail's office, where she was slouched in her chair, staring at a blank computer screen while tapping her fingers nervously on the desk. "What's your plan for tonight?" I asked, hoping to pull her out of her funk. "Nothing much, Hugh. Just wrapping up. After that, I'll have Billy bring the car, and then I'll head out for some drinks with a friend. Just a quiet night." "I guess I'm getting older," she replied, a hint of resignation in her voice. "You're still young, Gail," I said, trying to encourage her. "And I already sent Billy home." She turned to me, surprised. "You did what?" "I told Billy to take the car home and enjoy the rest of his night off." "Why?" "Because we're going out tonight. You, me, and some friends." Gail shook her head, clearly reluctant. "You don't have to do that, Hugh. I wouldn't be very good company tonight." "That's exactly why we're going out," I insisted. "No arguments. Uncle Hugh has spoken." We left the bank's parking lot in my car, and I didn't answer her questions as we drove south. When we turned onto a side street that led to a large barn-like building, she finally broke the silence. "O'Brien's?" she said, realization dawning on her. "Of all the places," she continued, slightly incredulous. "If I'd known we were going to a casual spot, I would have dressed differently." I laughed. "It's not fancy, but it's just what you need right now. You need a place to relax, have some fun, and let loose for a while. Percy and Bobby haven't had a good time like this in ages. I think we all could use it." When we arrived at O'Brien's, the place was lively, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. I had called ahead and asked the owner, O'Brien, who used to be a professional boxer, if he could reserve us a table. He assured me there would be a spot available when we got there. However, as we walked in, we quickly discovered some guests had seen the reserved tables and ignored the waitstaff trying to hold them for us. The atmosphere turned chaotic as we entered, with some patrons settling in at the tables meant for us. Normally, O'Brien would have handled this situation swiftly, but he seemed tied up with a ruckus coming from the back of the bar. Percy, Bobby, Percy's boyfriend, and Chow Volve were all seated at one of the tables, watching the scene unfold in silence as Gail and I approached. One of the larger guests leaned over to Percy and sneered, "No saving spots in O'Brien's, buddy. Everyone knows that. Why don't you and your friend go somewhere else?" He glanced at Gail and me, then added, "You can sit over there if your friend joins us. What do you say? You look like you could use some company." Gail's response was immediate and sharp. "Really? Where? All I see are a few people who don't seem worth the effort," she shot back. That's when the night took an unexpected turn. The atmosphere in the bar was tense as Percy squared up to the biggest guy, his stance resolute and unwavering. In a surprising display of strength, he pushed the guy back across the bar, sending shockwaves through the crowd. The guy's friend attempted to retaliate but quickly found himself outmatched by Percy and another buddy who jumped in to help. Meanwhile, one of the men who had insulted Bobby threw a drink at him, but Bobby dodged the splash, unintentionally causing chaos for Chowan. Seeing the commotion, Bobby leaped over the table, confronting the instigator head-on. As more people got involved, the situation escalated into sheer pandemonium. I took a step forward, determined to help and create some order, guiding Gail behind me for safety. My background in sports and self-defense gave me a flicker of confidence as I moved into the fray. The first person I encountered fell quickly, I didn't even have to break a sweat. The second, however, was a bit more resilient. But once I managed to calm him down, he surrendered, lying down and no longer willing to fight. As I fought my way through the crowd, I suddenly caught a glimpse of someone familiar. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, someone who looked like Mary. There are plenty of tall women with brown hair, and this one moved just like I remembered her. It could have easily been a coincidence, but as I looked closer, I realized it truly was her. Mary was swaying gently with a tall guy dressed in a blue sweater and matching blue pants. He was around my height, maybe a bit taller, which allowed her to fit snugly against him. They glided across the dance floor, oblivious to the world around them. The song playing was Sarah McLachlan's I Will Remember You, a track the DJ had dubbed romantic. As they danced, I noticed his hand resting comfortably on her back, while she leaned into him, eyes closed, lost in the moment. A wave of confusion washed over me. She was supposed to be elsewhere, somewhere far removed from the scene. This was my territory now, after she had chosen to leave for a better life, as she put it. It felt silly to feel this way. We had been divorced for a long time. She could be with anyone she wanted, but I wished she wouldn't flaunt it so blatantly in front of me. With a slight thud, I tapped my forehead against the table, the frustration bubbling up inside me. Mary had mentioned having other relationships after we split, so I knew I had no right to feel upset. I turned my gaze away, downing the rest of my drink. Then, pulling out my phone, I dialed a number I hadn't called in ages. "I'm only answering this because I'm curious," came the voice on the other end. "Hugh, you haven't called in forever. I thought you'd moved on and have found someone nice by now, not just reminiscing about old friends." "Ha, old friends with a past," I replied, feeling a faint smile creep into my tone. I could sense your smile through the phone. "Why do you say that?" she asked, her tone playful yet sincere. "Maybe because it hurts when someone seems to care only about one part of a relationship and then moves on. It's tough, you know?" "That sounds complicated. But I stopped calling because you were just too much to handle. You thought we didn't connect outside those moments. It's because there were so many times I wished things were different for us." "You should have been a salesperson, Hugh, you could convince anyone of anything," she teased. "Why are you calling me tonight? You can't seriously be hoping to convince me to give you another chance, can you?" "I'm at O'Brien's on the west side with some friends, but I'm on my own. The music is great, and the vibe is lively. I can't help but think of you. We never really danced much, did we?" "No, we didn't," I admitted. "But we had our fun times. You weren't too bad for an old friend." "Oh, you're joking, right? I know you're busy, but if you weren't tied up, I thought you might want to join me for a few drinks. It could be a nice change of scenery." "Actually, I'm at Pelican's right now. My date went to grab me a drink. He thinks he can impress me. I was almost ready to leave because he's a bit dull." "Your idea sounds great. I'll catch a cab and be there in half an hour." "I know you can handle things on your own, but since this is somewhat of a date, just call me when you arrive, and I'll come out to pay the bill." "Oh, by the way, what are you wearing?" There was a pause. "Wow, you must be excited tonight." "I'm dressed up really well. Is it too much?" "Why yes, now you're making me upset. I have some self-respect, you know. I'm not going to let you show me off just to make someone else jealous." "Well, maybe it is, but for a good reason. I'll tell you when I see you. It's someone who needs to feel a bit envious tonight. I want you to look your best." "All right, I'll be there. I want to see what made you feel this way." My phone buzzed with a new song, and I was still riding high on the energy of the night as I stepped outside. When I saw Brittany approaching, I couldn't help but think back to our previous encounters. I hoped she'd learned how to hold a good conversation since our last meeting. The cab driver shot me an approving look. "If you ever figure out how to bottle what attracts women like that, let me know. I'll buy a case." I leaned over, whispering with a generous tip, "It's called confidence. Lots of it." He nodded, impressed, and drove off.